Let's get more reaction now about George Michael's music. We're joined on the line by independent music journalist Sean Brokensha. Sean, this news has not only hit internationally, many of his fans, but also locally. When I'm taking a look at Twitter now, and it's the top trend currently, rest in peace, George. Give us a sense of how popular George Michael would have been in South Africa.
Well, majorly, and certainly in me and in my life, and people of my age, I'm the same age as George Michael was. We grew up with George Michael. He was our role model. In the early days of Wham, we all had the Snow White denim jackets. We tried to get the hairstyle right. We tried to have the attitude of Wham, and we kind of grew with George. And George has always been there. He's been one of the most dominant figures of my generation in terms of growing up, along with Prince and Bowie. And what a year 2016 has been. But the story of Georgios Panayiotis starts in North London. His dad was a Greek Cypriot who ran a restaurant. The family lived in a commuter town nearby. His mother was English, and she was a dancer. So he came from a creative background, and he came from a very loving family. And he was actually... The controversy about his sexuality, which only emerged much later in the 90s, he was gay from being a teenager. He still was bisexual. And his family told him, don't tell anyone. Rather keep it to yourself, especially if you want to be a singer. He showed musical talent very early. He was at school with a guy called Andrew Ridgeley, who was his best friend. They remained friends throughout their lives, despite the fact that they'd formed Wham and they split. And he used to busk on the London Underground. He used to sing Queen songs on a guitar when he was at school. And he also worked as a DJ. So the music industry was definitely where young George was heading. And Wham wasn't the first band he started. He started a ska band called The Executive, together with Andrew and Andrew's brother Paul. But he realized that ska wasn't quite the thing for him. And if you look at the 80s, when Wham started, 1981, British pop was made up of elements of punk and post-punk and the new wave movement. And they actually did present something different, Wham, because they were square pop with attitude, not pretty pop. Pop that walked down the street and strutted and said, young guns, go for it, and changed the world. And he caught the imagination, especially George, but the band themselves, they skyrocketed to fame. So much so that by 1985, they'd had a slew of number one hits. George had won a Grammy Award as a solo artist with Aretha Franklin in a duet. And in 1986, they split up. But they'd already sold 100 million albums in 5 years. That's more than most bands do in an entire lifetime. George had been part of Live Aid in 85. They were the first band to tour China, first Western band to tour China. So these young men achieved an incredible amount in the first 5 years of the 80s. And George has kept on going. And, Wham was always spelled with an exclamation mark. They never lost their appeal. They still haven't lost their appeal. They never got old, and they never lost the need for that exclamation mark. George went on to even better things, unbelievably. It was also the era of MTV. So people who were camera-friendly and people who looked sexy on camera did very well, and it prompted the second British invasion after the 60s Beatles British invasion, prompted the second British invasion of the USA market, and they absolutely loved George. But the success started taking its toll. After monster solo hits, solo albums like Faith, for example, which presented this new George. He was wearing shades, he was wearing a leather jacket, his hair was different, he had cowboy boots, he played the guitar. This was a rocker, this was not a boy teen idol. And he started getting more and more exhausted. His record company, Sony, pushed him to do concert tours, promotional videos, interviews, and eventually got to the stage in 1990 where he said, no more. And he went to war with Sony. And he refused to do anything for 3 years. But it didn't mean he was idle. He very, very famously stood in for Freddie Mercury at the Freddie Mercury tribute concert. He was the one guy on the whole planet, apart from possibly Bowie, who could match Freddie with that lineup. And people could see it quite obviously. He did duets with a number of people. And then in the early 90s, he got involved with a Brazilian dancer, Felipe Anselmo. And Felipe died in 1993 of an AIDS-related brain hemorrhage. And this is when George decided he would acknowledge his sexuality. And he came out with the album Older, in which an older, wiser, sadder, but more honest George Michael was presented to the world. And he decided he was going to make no apologies for anything. And he was just going to live his life as publicly as possible and didn't care, which was a brave thing to do, but it ultimately, this defiance led to his demise because he started taking more and more drugs. He started getting, in the 2000s, he started getting arrested more and more. He's arrested a number of times for various things. Indecency, that famous incident in the public toilet in Los Angeles. And the way he reacted to that was amazing. Chutzpah. He came out with a song called Outside, talking about the hypocrisy in America and the cops in particular. But he got arrested for other things, possession of cannabis. He admitted in 2008 that he could not give up eight or more spliffs a day. He actually went to prison for 4 weeks in 2010. And despite all of this, the work continued. Despite his habits, despite the controversy, because he almost seemed to thrive on it. And he became someone who we'd like to have thought of like Keith Richards. He would go on forever. He would be this unrepentant rascal. And so it's such a body blow that he should die just suddenly, unexpectedly. Despite everything, he remained virile in our minds, and he remained that guy strutting down the streets in 1981.
And certainly his fans will be grateful for the fact that his music continues to live on. Thank you for that very comprehensive look at the life of George Michael, independent music journalist Brokensha.